I'd like to introduce Sarah Kahn, our keynote speaker for this meeting, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about the ACLU, your work with jail conditions in Orange County, and anything else that you have to share.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. And it's great to come after these incredible people. I feel very humbled, so I appreciate the opportunity. I want to start by saying, yeah, I'm a 3L law student. I am going to be a fellow at the ACLU last year, and I have assisted them with this litigation. And I'm also a member of some community organizations, Stop the Musick Coalition and Transforming Justice Orange County. But as a caveat, I'm here as an individual, so all of my opinions and statements are mine. And don't represent anyone. But I am going to start with, I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if it works. Can you all see that? So I think that the best people to tell us about the carceral system in Orange County are people who are incarcerated. So I want to start just with a very quick, a quick check-in with the TikTok of somebody who is incarcerated at Theo Lacey Jail.
Sarah, can I?
Okay, this is just 60 seconds.
You all is, at what point does a human life lose its value and worth? There are many of us, including myself, that have made terrible choices in mistakes, but we have worked diligently to better ourselves and to atone for our past behavior so that we can someday return to our communities and become productive members of society. Unfortunately, because of the complete disregard that the Orange County Sheriff, Don Barnes, has shown for our lives, many of us will never make it home. Sheriff Don Barnes tells people to be afraid of the incarcerated community. The incarcerated community fears him, for our lives are in his hands.
Okay, so that was Jose Armendariz. He's a member of an organization that I am also a member of and a friend, and he is incarcerated at Theo Lacey. Let me just see if these slides will come up. So I wanted to start by just talking about the case that was mentioned earlier, the COVID litigation. So in April, the ACLU decided that they should bring along a lawsuit along with Covington and Burling against OCSD because of conditions in the jail having to do with COVID. So a lot of advocates were very worried about folks who were incarcerated because jails and prisons became like a petri dish. People are trapped and can't get access to the care that they need. So Orange County jails do not afford an opportunity for social distancing. Bunks are about 3 feet apart, and the recommended social distancing is 6 feet. And a lot of the congregate settings, barracks and dorms usually house around 60 or 70 people. So in December, Judge Wilson found that OCSD had showed deliberate indifference and that it needed to enact certain measures to protect incarcerated people, such as providing PPE and soap, and that it needed to transfer or release enough people to reduce the population in congregate settings by 50%. So the community knew, especially when Sheriff Barnes and Spitzer were explaining this order, they made it seem like we have to release 50% of the people who are currently incarcerated. And that wasn't the case. So the jail population was already low at the time, and the order was just for congregate spaces. So it wouldn't affect, double cells or single cells. It was only for those spaces where dorms or barracks bunks were lined up, just a few feet apart. After the order, Barnes began kind of informing Orange County that they should be very afraid about these releases. The public should be in a panic and concerned. Current DA Todd Spitzer also did the same thing, said a judge's ruling to reduce the jail population in the Orange County jail system by half will release dangerous and violent criminals back into our neighborhoods to commit more crimes. So there was a lot of fear mongering about it, and all of the cities in Orange County signed on to an amicus brief in support of Barnes and against litigation. And I think folks were under the impression that suddenly crime was going to balloon and all of our communities were going to become unsafe. Sheriff Barnes did not follow the order. He resisted the order to release and transfer folks very strongly. And very shortly after that order, maybe a week after that order, of the 3,300 people that were incarcerated, over 1,000 of them were positive for COVID. So this is art from somebody who's currently incarcerated. So I just want to go through a little bit about who is actually incarcerated in Orange County. So it was kind of shared that everybody is a murderer who is incarcerated in Orange County. Just as a primer, so a misdemeanor usually, that legal definition is a little more technical, but it usually does not result in serious injury to another person or theft over $950. Felonies can be much more serious. They can be things like murder, but they can also be certain crimes that most folks might assume or think of as lesser crimes. So fraud, obstructing justice, these things can also be felonies. This is a picture of who is incarcerated in November of 2020. So keeping in mind that it's a little bit skewed based on the fact that there were a lot of releases. A little bit more, around 2/3 of the people are pretrial. They haven't been convicted of anything. And only 1/3 are actually sentenced and convicted. Of the people who are sentenced and convicted, about 2/3 are sentenced for a felony and 1/3 for a misdemeanor. And then of the pretrial folks, about 3/4 are sentenced or charged with a felony, but you also have to keep in mind a few things affect that. One of the things is that in the last year, they lowered bail and tried to release a lot of misdemeanor folks pretrial in order to reduce the jail populations for COVID reasons. But another is that DAs will often overcharge, and then people will ultimately plead to a misdemeanor. So some of those people that are in pretrial on a felony charge actually committed a crime that's going to wash out of the system as a misdemeanor. Often people are charged very high as a way to pressure them to plead. So you can also see the racial disparity of people who are incarcerated versus people who are living in our community. So folks who are people of color are extremely overrepresented in the jails in Orange County. I think it was mentioned before that systems of oppression are recreated and enforced by carceral systems, which recreate those discriminatory effects of social and economic injustice. So this is from 2010 to 2018. It's not the most recent years, but these are the most common charges that bring people into the Orange County jails. So around a little over half of the people are in for one of these charges. And you can see that the first 4 are either mental health or substance use related, or there's no person harmed, or at least not physically harmed in these crimes. So DUI and drug possession come in at the top, and those are both criminalized, but could be seen as a public health issue. So despite resisting these releases, Barnes did release a lot of people. You can see that the jail population dropped significantly in the last year, in large part because of litigation and statewide efforts to reduce jail populations across the state. And as that was happening, there was an almost 45% reduction. There was no evidence that crime increased. So there, in the sheriff coroner's report, homicide numbers didn't increase. And if you flip through county crime mapping that the sheriff publishes, there was also no apparent increase in crime, although we have half the number of people incarcerated that we used to. So in the most recent order, the judge said that we had reached 50% in congregate settings. We're still getting a lot of reports from folks that we have not reached 50%. People are saying they're still housed in these extremely full barracks and dorms. So the litigation is ongoing. So there's a lot of shout outs to Voice of OC in this presentation. So thank you for the incredible reporting. But one thing that Voice of OC recently reported on is, as the jail was being sued for its handling of COVID, the Sheriff's Department was also getting pretty significant raises in its budget out of the CARES Act. And in fact, the sheriff received more funding than healthcare agency employees received from the CARES Act, which is intended to alleviate some of the struggles of COVID. This reflects, I think Norberto was saying earlier, the overall trend in Orange County to overinvest in carceral responses to crisis and to social problems, and to underinvest in our community and in the health and recovery of our community. So you can see here that the Orange County Sheriff's Department's budget has continued to increase and just about doubled over the last 10 years, while social services have lost funding. And that brings me to the James A. Musick jail. So I wanted to share a little bit about a new jail that they are expanding. It used to be a low-level offenders jail. It's on the edge of Irvine. It's been shuttered for about 2 years. It used to house folks on ICE detention through a contract with the federal government. And when that contract was canceled, they closed Musick down. It was pretty unlivable at the time. And so they decided to expand it. This wasn't a new decision. They've been trying to expand Musick for over a decade. In 2012, the city of Irvine actually sued Orange County in a SECA lawsuit to stop them from building Musick. And it was successful temporarily, but essentially a SECA lawsuit only requires an in-depth study before moving forward. So it didn't stop them from ever being able to move forward, but it slowed the process by many years. So the expansion is going to add 900 new beds and make newly available 2,200 beds. The construction cost, so this is just the construction contract with Bernard's Brothers, is $288 million, with an operating cost of over $61.5 million. And construction began a few months ago. This is a breakdown of the cost. So all told, we are getting around $180 million in state funding and spending around $130 million of Orange County's discretionary budget, with a $20 million loan from OC Waste and Recycling, which will presumably continue to grow over time. In the future, in order to maintain this jail, we'll be spending $61.5 million a year. And just a quick breakdown of where this money is coming from. I mentioned a bit of this, but $80 million is coming from SB 1022, a bill that was created in order to expand treatment in the jails. So possibly because of that, they are reserving a certain number of jail beds specifically for folks with mental health needs. And those jail beds, the construction of those jail beds, although they're going to be physically identical in every way to the other jail beds in the jail, are funded by that $80 million that's intended for improving and increasing treatment for incarcerated people. So Sheriff Barnes has shared, by default, Orange County Jail has become the de facto mental health hospital of Orange County. Around 40% of people currently incarcerated in Orange County have unmet mental health needs. And Supervisor Doe has stated that we need to see it as an opportunity for see incarceration as an opportunity for treatment. So the county agrees, all players on all sides, there is an issue with folks with mental health needs ending up in jail. I think a lot of players disagree on what we should do about that. I believe that we should invest in our community. Our community is best set up to take care of our community members. Jail is a punitive environment where it's violent, it's stressful, it's traumatic. Although these beds are reserved for folks with mental health needs, there's no evidence that's publicly available that they're going to meet those mental health needs. So folks the available plan does not include plans to hire mental health professionals. That, at least what is publicly available, does not mention that. There's a lot of mentions of training existing staff and training law enforcement and guards in order to give more mental health treatment. But as you can imagine, those aren't the people best qualified or best situated to provide care to people that they are also controlling and are incarcerating. So no mental health professionals outside of correctional health services were consulted in the decision to expand. So only Correctional Health Services runs the healthcare for folks who are incarcerated in OC's jails. But the general mental health care community wasn't brought into that decision and whether that decision would best serve their patients. Studies show that people don't get well in a cell, and people who are in Orange County have shared that a lot of the issues with getting mental health care don't come from a need for more beds or even a need for more funding. They come from a general disinterest from employees of the jail to provide that care or allow for that care. So for example, somebody had contacted me because he was schizophrenic and he was in isolation because of COVID quarantine conditions. And he had been told, he asked a guard, I'm not doing well, I'm hearing voices. And they gave him a piece of paper to color on. And they said, like, hopefully this will make you feel better. So jail creates a revolving door. I think we all know that recidivism is not cured by incarceration. While incarcerated, most people lose their health insurance. Incarceration interrupts continuum of care, and it cuts people off from their providers in the community. While incarcerated, this was mentioned earlier, but people lose their jobs, people are isolated from their loved ones. Incarceration causes severe trauma, and criminal records create more barriers to obtaining housing, employment, and services. And people often are released from jail. I had spoken to a few people that mentioned that in Laguna Beach, there's an issue that folks are discharged from a hospital without any plan or anywhere to go. And the same is true in jail, but worse. So people are sometimes released with nothing and no phone or nowhere to charge their phone and nowhere to go and no plan for follow-up. So one thing that I wanted to mention that I think Orange County is underutilizing is PC 1001.36, mental health diversion. So around 35 people who are represented by public defenders are currently active on pretrial mental health diversion. Over 65,000 are arrested every year. So of 65,000 people, 35 are completing mental health diversion. What happens with mental health diversion is instead of getting a criminal record, you go and complete your treatment plan, take medication, meet with a doctor, whatever is in the plan that your mental health care provider creates. And if you complete that plan, that treatment plan, then you end up not getting incarcerated and not receiving a criminal record. So some of the barriers to obtaining diversion in Orange County include the difficulty and cost of obtaining the evaluation necessary for the petition, opposition to mental health petitions from the DA's office. So the DA, Todd Spitzer, has written some articles about how mental health diversion is a get out of jail free card, or is somehow releasing people who shouldn't be released. And judges are also very resistant to granting mental health diversion. So wait lists for permanent supportive housing in Orange County are in the thousands. Wait lists for subsidized housing are in the 80,000s. Wait lists for residential mental health or substance use treatment beds are up to 8 months. And patients are often stuck in hospitals not meant to be providing long-term or mental health care because there's nowhere for them to go. We right now are building, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. We are right now building a campus for Be Well OC. So that's with Mind OC. And I think they built around 90 beds for that campus, while we're building 2,200 beds for the Musick jail. So there's a significant imbalance in the way that the county is investing in our communities. And I will go remind you of the earlier slide. Our county's jails are at a historic low. So there's 3,200 people incarcerated. After the Musick jail is built, we're bringing our capacity up well past 7,000. So there's no explanation as to why we need these extra beds when our population is already far fewer than the number of existing beds in our community. And hundreds of millions of dollars are going to go to this expansion when our community really needs care. So I had a video, but I'm not sure if we had time because of my technical issues. So I'll ask someone to chime in and let me know if we actually have time to show any of that.
Yes, you do, Sarah. Keep going. This is fantastic. We want to hear more.
Okay, I tried to really speed through because I feel like I'm taking up everyone's time.
You're not wasting anyone's time. It's really great. I just want to give you the time to do your presentation. So thank you.
Okay, I'll show the first part of this presentation, or this video, so apologies.
Sarah, is there sound? If there's
You can't hear it?
No, so
let me try that. Are you able to hear that?
1 and 3 item.
Move the item. Second.
No objections, passes. 23. Under Sheriff Corner, adopt latest plans and specifications. Receive bids and award contract to Bernard Brothers Inc. for James A. Musick Facility Jail Construction Project, Phase 1 and Phase 2. Second. No objections, passes.
Jail, the Orange County jail system is the largest mental health hospital in Orange County. We have, when we're at capacity, or at our normal capacity, I should say, prior to COVID, we had 2,000 people who have a daily nexus to mental health treatment. That's 2/5 or 40% of our jail population every day. Specifically with our jails, the Orange County jail system is one of the largest jail systems in the nation. It's considered a mega jail. We have the capacity for 7,600 people within our jails. Earlier last year, I had closed the Musick branch jail for a reconstruction project. I took those people who were there. I canceled the ICE contract. I did that. We had a contract to house up to 950 ICE detainees, but we canceled that contract and allowed us to move our deputies assigned to the Musick jail to our other facilities and start addressing the mental health crisis that we are dealing with within the jails.
But the county jails still remain ill-equipped to help anyone who, like me, wanted a way out. The emotional, verbal, and mental abuse was still very rampant. The cause of my arrest was a heroin addiction. So when you stop and think that over 20 years of my life, I kept getting sentenced to prison when, what I needed was treatment, what I needed was care.
That I wasn't gonna do anything. He went to grab my hand. He said that he saw me make it into a fist, even though this was not true. And he went to grab my hand and he tried to twist it, took me down to the ground, and immediately all the deputies, about 20 deputies, jumped in, started beating me, left me. I was in a pool of my own blood.
I have been detained at James A. Musick Facility over 6 months. Well, it's a place that makes you break your heart all the time. So we try to distract ourselves and try to draw like the faces of the women there.
Dollars of our taxpayer money to expand his jail empire at the James Musick Facility. To those of you who hear me, I say, do not stand by and just blame Don Barnes or his deputies for expanding their torture chambers with your money. Stop them. Stop him. Don Barnes does not care about the mentally ill or those who suffer from substance abuse issues. Jail is not the answer. This place is killing us. It's killing our minds and it's killing our souls. Please help us. Please stop the Musick expansion.
Okay, so I tried to burn through it a little quicker just to make sure I wasn't taking too much of your time. So I can do questions now unless there's something else you want me to.
No, questions is perfect. We want to give an opportunity to have everyone ask you questions. This has been great content, and Adam is going to facilitate the question and answer session now, Sarah. So I will let Adam take it from here.
All right, awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for that presentation. It was so important for us to experience and really learn from the inside. And once again, just thank you so much for going out of your way to prepare this presentation for us and really help us understand the perspectives from the inside and how during COVID, a jail sentence can also be a death sentence, whether that's the intention of the prosecutors or not. So I'd like to start with a question from one of our outstanding members, Becky Visconti. She was interested in, you mentioned that there are some ICE detainments happening in the OC jail system. So her exact question is, are immigration detainees held in the OC jails or in separate facilities? It doesn't seem feasible to her to detain them in jails, especially during COVID.
That's a great question. I 100% agree. It's not, feasible or humane. So Orange County jails don't house people on ICE holds, and there is a California statute that says that Orange County or any county law enforcement can't cooperate with the federal government to the extent that they can't hand people over based on their immigration status. So for example, it would be illegal for the Orange County jail to keep somebody beyond their sentence ending in order to wait for ICE to come pick them up. So that said, Orange County does get around that in a few ways. Immigration detentions are Adelanto. Adelanto is not, it's about 2 hours from here. So if folks are on an ICE hold, they're generally in Adelanto, although I've been to Adelanto many times. I've represented some folks living in Adelanto through my clinic, and it's pretty horrible. So immigration detention it's a jail too. So it's not a good place to be. But the short answer is no, they ended their contract with the federal government, so they are not holding folks on an ICE hold. However, there are people who are charged criminally for crossing the border without documentation in some cases, and those people might be held in the jail.
All right, great. Thank you so much for answering that question. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. Someone is asking a question in the chat under my name. So if that's you, please change your name. I was having a little bit of gaslighting effect, wondering if I asked a question. I didn't remember.
I apologize. That was Marina.
No worries, Marina. So next up, I would like to ask a question on behalf of Bethany Webb, who said, what can we do to stop the Musick facility?
Great question. So we have a coalition of organizations that's working on just this issue, and there's a lot of ways forward, I guess. So their construction is underway, but it's not certain that they've decided how many beds are going to be built. So they had planned to build 900 additional beds and reopen those 2,200, but construction is very, very early. So there is still the possibility of encouraging at least a reduction in the beds. Our hope is that there's a possibility of convincing the Board of Supervisors that this money would be better spent on permanent supportive housing, on decentralized community-based mental health care and treatment, voluntary residential mental health treatment, voluntary residential substance use treatment, and housing, because I would love to see them build housing on that campus. It's a lovely area of town. It would be great to have housing there. And so many people end up interacting with law enforcement and end up being charged because they don't have a home to go home to, because they have a substance use disorder or dependence. And there's just a better way. So there's actually a workshop going on tomorrow where we will share some more action items, and I can share some more information about that in the chat. But the Stop the Musick Coalition is a coalition of community organizations working to pressure the Board of Supervisors to really consider investing more in our community and divesting somewhat from this law enforcement response, which we think is not an effective solution.
Great. And several more questions. I love how engaged our membership is being in this dialogue. I just wanted to comment real quick on Councilmember George Weiss. I appreciated how much he was commenting throughout your presentation. So he had a couple comments on the overcrowding of jails and the impact of COVID spread based on overcrowding. So if you could just talk a little bit more on that before I highlight some other questions.
Yeah, so COVID really made jails and prisons into petri dishes. Thousands of people across the country died in jails because of COVID. You can't socially distance. Jails in some ways are even more dangerous than prisons because people are coming in and out of jails all the time. So people are arrested, people are released. There's also, of course, in both jails and prisons, there's staff that are coming in and out. In Orange County, we had a really big problem that staff didn't want to wear their masks, didn't want to observe any type of precautions, washing hands, or allowing folks to separate from each other. So it was extremely dangerous. I think I mentioned at one point, 1,000 people were concurrently positive for COVID, which was a third of the jail population at the time. And a few people have died, I believe, from COVID this year. So it was incredibly dangerous and scary.
Great, thank you so much. My next question is on behalf of Marina Paul. She is a high school alumni on site of me. Her question was, she's interested to hear more about incarcerated people's reintroduction into society, what programs, jobs, etc. are set up so that they can be successful when they're already at a detriment due to a faulty criminal justice system.
Great question. So there is, I think, 48,000 different barriers to reentry when you have a criminal record. Things like not being able to get housing, not being able to get jobs, not being able to statutorily not being allowed to do certain things. And there are a few organizations in Orange County. There's Underground Grit, there's Project Kinship, there's organizations that also provide representation to folks who are unhoused, like I think Brooke Weitzman is here, Elder Center, and others. But there isn't enough. There's extremely minimal programming in Orange County. And I think Brooke also just commented, and I agree with that 100%, that the first step really is housing. There's a lot of studies that show that mental health treatment, substance use treatment, all of these things happen when you have housing much, much, much more effectively. When you don't have housing, it's extremely hard to live safely.
Great. And our last question of the night is from John Light. And the question is, why are children referred to adult court in Orange County?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry about the dog interruption. The question was, why are so many children referred to adult court in Orange County?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think Orange County is just a little bit conservative in its bent, and it is very heavily law enforcement. And the party line is public safety over the human rights and humanity of people who are caught up in the criminal legal system. I think we talked about this earlier as well. Some of the speakers before me talked about this. You know, incarceration does recreate systems of oppression, and Orange County is a very, very, very classist and also it can be very racist area. So it's hard to protect folks that are vulnerable, because the argument tends to be, we're keeping community members safe by doing this. So whenever there is an outlook that favors an idea of public safety, that community health and community safety comes from excluding or locking up certain people, that usually comes with a tendency to see young people as older than they are and to charge them as adults.
Thank you so much for all of your answers to these questions, and your presentation was so informative, especially on behalf of COVID spread in the jails and the impact that it has on our community. I am so grateful that you prepared this presentation and came to speak to our membership. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.